So I am now going to start our PowerPoint presentation and say welcome to Communications Justice. This webinar is about how to get affordable quality broadband for all nationally and locally. And I'm trying to move the pages of my webinar. So my the UCC's ministry. Oh, here we are. Okay, so our presenters today. Thank you. You know, we wouldn't have a communications webinar on the very first day if we didn't have a little bit of technical problems. So now that I'm after practicing several times to advance my slides, I can advance the slides. So today we're going to have with us, I am Cheryl Lienza. As I said, I'm with the UCC's Media Justice Ministry. We also have Kimberly Vasquez, who's a recent graduate of Baltimore City College High School and a lead organizer of Somos. Paulo Balboa, manager of programs and data at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and Reverend Zach Kersey, who's associate pastor of First Church Sterling. Really, I'm so grateful to these folks. They've been doing incredibly innovative work in the area of how to get communications justice, how to get broadband, affordable broadband to all. And I'm incredibly grateful that they made their time to come with us today. So I wanted to talk very quickly about the UCC's Media Justice Ministry, because some people in the UCC know all about it and other people are like, what are you? So we are almost as old as the denomination itself. We were founded in 1959 by the Reverend Everett Parker. And at the time, he had had a meeting with Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, can you do something about television stations in the South? And Dr. Parker was a leader in religion and media and faith in media. And he went out and started to work with people on the ground. And he first decided to challenge a TV station license in Jackson, Mississippi, because it was not serving the African Americans who lived in that community. And he worked with local UCC members to monitor the television station, to determine how African Americans were being treated. He brought a challenge to the Federal Communications Commission, and he pushed and pushed and pushed, and the FCC turned him away, and they went to court, and the courts finally validated not only the fact that local TV stations at the time had to serve their communities, including people of color in their communities, but also that members of the public had the right to go to a Federal Communications Commission and demand that everybody is served, that you didn't just need to be a company to go and engage with the federal agencies that regulate these issues. So we have taken that mandate and that mission from his work and still work on it today. So we sometimes work on broadcast media consolidation, and we're just in the Supreme Court this past year trying to fight to make sure that more women and people of color can own local TV stations. And we work on affordable access to broadband internet. And we work on holding social media accountable, the very dominant platform today when they adopt policies that allow hate speech and violence to be transmitted over their platforms. So we're very active. We work a lot in Washington, D.C., and we work a lot with our partners around us. So I invite you to come to our website, uccmediajustice.org, if you want to learn more about our work, and I'm really glad to be here. So as we got started on this discussion today, one of the first things we thought is we wanted to give you a couple of basic definitions to help you understand the work and how we talk about it. Because we know in the UCC, we talk about social justice, and we talk about trying to get at the root cause of problems rather than just kind of putting a Band-Aid on a problem. And so Paulo from Ndia is going to share with us a quick primer.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, so just brief introduction to me and who Ndia is. We are the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We officially began as a 501c3 in 2015, but our work of digital equity and digital inclusion has existed long before 2015. We're talking about technical support in places like public computer labs, community-based organizations, anyone who has part of their mission that social service orientation, if it's through digital means, that's what digital equity and digital inclusion means. So when we first got our start in 2015, officially, we gathered all of the smartest people that we knew and said, we need to make sure that we're using the same language and the same vocabulary to describe this work, because we can easily go off the rails, and it can also be exclusive to use vocabulary that is unfamiliar to folks who are outside of the field. So we came up with these two definitions, digital equity and digital inclusion, which, as Cheryl mentioned, I think is useful just to frame our discussion today. We'll be referring to these concepts throughout the course of today's presentation. Digital equity is what I like to think of as the goal, right? We want to get community members to this place of having the full capacity, or for having the capacity for full participation in society, democracy, and the economy. What does that mean in a more practical sense? I just think of last year when COVID hit. It was a census year. It was a US presidential election year. All of these activities for participation in democracy and society, they suddenly needed to happen online. So the fear was which community members or how many people are being potentially left behind or undercounted because they don't have the means or the capacity to fill out a census form online or to register to vote for the first time, right? So that's the sort of place that we want to get people to. In our world, we understand that not everyone is there. Not everyone is in this digital equity place. So that's where this other definition, digital inclusion, comes into play. Digital inclusion is the how. How do we get community members to this place of digital equity? You see listed there those 5 bullet points, those activities necessary for full participation. How do we get to a framework of digital equity? I just want to focus in on that first bullet point, affordable home broadband, because that's the thrust of today's workshop. I want to take an aside and talk about the difference between availability and adoption of broadband. Availability refers to physical infrastructure in the ground. Just because the wires go underneath a home in a major city or in a rural area, the bigger question is who is actually subscribing. That's the question of adoption. Frequently, we're seeing that just because the physical infrastructure are there, community members might not actually take on an internet service subscription because it's too expensive. So just if I could underscore, and maybe I should have done that before sending Cheryl these slides, just underscore the affordable, the word affordable in that first bullet point. I'll be talking a little bit later about digital literacy and tech support in a program that Ndia is doing nationally called Digital Navigators. But I just wanted to do some table setting for today's discussion. So
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you
Send it
so
back
much.
to you, Cheryl.
Sure. Thank you so much, Paolo. That's really helpful. So this is great. So now we're understanding digital inclusion, digital equity, right? We're like, how do you get people online, and then what are the basics that they need? What is our goal? How do we get there? And maybe we knew that intuitively, but it's great to be able to really put names to it and just talk about how we're getting to where we need to go and what are the pieces that we need to put together to get there. And so I want to now introduce somebody who is so exciting to hear from and talk with, is Kimberly Vasquez. She just graduated from high school. She and her colleagues at Somos in Baltimore worked together to hold big ISPs accountable and make sure that everybody in her community could be much more connected than they already were. So I'm going to turn over the presentation now to Kimberly Vasquez.
Hi, so thank you for that introduction. I use she, her pronouns, and SOMO stands for Students Organizing a Multicultural and Open Society. We are a student-led advocacy group, and we started back in 2014. At first, we started kind of like a cultural group, but over time, we started going more into advocacy work, and we tackle systemic injustices in Baltimore schools. Many of our members are immigrants or children of immigrants, and where our work started with digital divide, or digital equity, I should say. COVID-19, as you know, forced us to go virtual, meaning if you didn't have internet, you were excluded from society as a whole, whether that meant education, employment opportunities, healthcare, social connectivity, and many more. And so, we saw these problems before COVID or before pandemic, but it definitely tremendously increased, and it really showed that how essential internet is. And a lot of our members couldn't enter like their classes, including myself. And so we decided to go and do research, as we always do with any new project that we want to take on. And we found that over 40% of Baltimore households have no broadband internet access. And in a city like Baltimore, where the school system is majority Black and Brown, we're talking about 1 out of every 2 Black and Latinx kids not being able to access their online education. And, you know, internet access is not taking into consideration the students who only had 1 device and had to share that amongst other people, or just using their phones and their cellular data, which led to high billing payments at the end of each month. And as well, there were families like mine who had internet, but it just wasn't enough. And so the internet that I have had for like years now has been Comcast Internet Essentials, which is a $995 plan for low-income families. And it's been a constant battle for me and my younger sisters to even get connected to our classes. At first, I couldn't even like really work on a Google document because it kept reconnecting and I couldn't really type on it. And it was really frustrating for me because I just, you know, I like, if I don't get it down, I'm going to forget. So I would forget what I was going to write for my papers, which is really annoying. But this was like the reality for many students across the country. And I was even lucky enough to have internet in the first place. And many mornings of this pandemic, my family and I had to decide who got priority to use the internet. Was it going to be me and my sister's education, or was it going to be my parents' work that puts food on the table? And it's really sad that people have to choose between education and, you know, living life. And on April of 2020, SOMOS, we got city funding for computers and hotspots, $3 million. And but this largely left out internet access, which was what I was facing, not access, but like higher speeds. And so we found it really appropriate to direct a letter of demands to Comcast. And because they had a monopoly here in our city, well, still have a monopoly here in our city. And hopefully you can, you can see them on the screen right now. And in only a few weeks, we had over 10 elected officials, over 100 organizations, and 1,500 people sign on to our demands, which got us a meeting with Comcast representatives. We met with the vice president of the DMV area. And, you know, to make long story short, we got our demands denied like several times. And they basically asked us to promote their Internet Essentials package, which made no sense because we were literally like, you know, telling them it didn't work. And they also argued that I had like 20 devices plugged into one outlet, which couldn't have been a possibility because in my neighborhood, that would have completely cut off my electricity. And so there we were seeing that this was more than just Baltimore, this was a national problem. So we partnered with organizations across the country, city council people in Philadelphia and Detroit, school board members from California and Colorado. We even talked with FCC acting chairwoman Rosenworcel. And, you know, we were creating this public pressure because really they would only respond to public when they were publicly shamed, which sounds really bad. But that's really the only thing that they would do, if anything. And after a long 9-month fight on March 2021, Comcast doubled their internet essential speeds, impacting over 1 million people nationwide. I was really happy, and it was a step in the right direction. But I am still having issues, and my peers are still having issues. Even with this increase. And so we're still here in Baltimore pushing for municipal broadband, which is public internet. but yeah, I kind of got tired of Comcast. And so we're really focusing on working with FCC on this issue. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave off for this. Sorry.
No, that's great. So you can see why I was so excited to bring Kimberly to talk with you, because I think sometimes we think, oh, I'm just one person. Can I do anything to change the world around me? And the truth is we all can. And so if these young students in Baltimore could speak up and get national attention and have a company finally pay attention and change something, they were trying to do something good. They were offering a more affordable product, but it wasn't working. And so it's, it's great power of community when we can all pull together and help each other out. And really impressed and proud of Kimberly and her colleagues and her fellow students in Baltimore who did great work with that, and they're continuing to work and continuing to push for more, because we all know one solution is usually the first step is not the final step. And so the next next person I want to introduce is Zach Kersey, and he is with First Church in Sterling, Massachusetts. And similar to Kimberly's story, this church went and looked around and looked during the pandemic to see what were the needs in their community, how could they help. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Kersey, and like Cheryl said, I'm the associate pastor at First Church in Sterling, Mass. My colleague, Reverend Robin Bartlett, is the lead pastor of the church, and we also have another member of our church on the Zoom, Dennis Mulryan, who's available if there's any questions I can't answer. So pretty early on in the pandemic, within the first few weeks after school closures took effect, Reverend Bartlett and other members of the church voiced that there was this really intractable problem where it was unsafe for kids to go to school, but when kids remained home, their parents weren't able to work, and they weren't getting equal access to education. I know that for my family, when we started having the kids home, my wife is an educator and immediately worked on putting together a curriculum for our kids, but most kids didn't have access to parents with that ability. And also there was an inability for parents to work and lead their kids in remote learning. I know that Reverend Bartlett and myself both said, yeah, it's great, for our kids to have online learning, but I have to sit there with them the entire time to help them get on Zoom and, Google Classroom and everything else. Kids under a certain age just didn't have the, capacity to do that. So really it was kind of impossible for parents to work at home, and it was impossible for kids to, have access to education while their parents were working. So we recognized that there was a need for some sort of remote learning center in our town. And the church is a UCC congregation. It's federated UCC and UU. We also have roots in the Baptist tradition. And we have this amazing centrally located building with a parish hall and access to fast broadband, as fast as Sterling could provide. We thought it would be relatively simple to just open our church's doors and say any kids who need fast internet and a safe place to do their schoolwork can come. What really started, though, took about 6 months to get the necessary credentials from state and local and town government. We are a rural town population of about 6,000, 7,000 people. Famously, where Mary Had a Little Lamb was written. That's like our one claim to fame. So, it was the kids in this area, the rural poor are often forgotten and left out. Kids in these rural areas a lot of times don't have access to the same types of enrichment activities and things like that that you might see in a city or a larger town. So we went about the work of starting up this remote learning center. We increased our internet. We put together a plan for moving and keeping the air clean. So we initiated a really expensive process of buying air purification systems, these surgical air filters, which was about $16,000, which the church was able to front the money, and then we started the task of fundraising. We also just reached out to experts in our church who were IT professionals to increase our broadband and upgrade our Wi-Fi so that we could handle, multiple Chromebooks at a time for the kids. And then, the regulatory hurdles that we had to face were with, the fire department, the Board of Health, the state and local education bureaus, things such as that. And then we had to go about, the process of not just explaining it to the town and the state, but also to the church itself, and explaining how access to fast internet in a safe place was a justice issue, that it allowed parents to work, it allowed kids to participate fully in their education, and it was a net positive contribution that we can make to the community. Long story short, we began operation in January after hiring 2 full-time staff members and coordinating volunteers, and everybody pitched in. The church provided volunteer hours. They put together art activities for the kids, came up with ways to have them safely play on the town common across the street with volunteers. And we put it out there that we were opening up in January, and we ended up having about 50 kids take part in the program. And this was, really successful right from the beginning. Families let us know the financial hardships they'd had, having to cut back on their work hours, the behavior issues that they'd had trying to get their own children to do work that normally a teacher would be asking the kids to do. And we operated through the beginning of April when schools were opened again. So it was a very short-lived program, but we learned a lot. And luckily, a lot of the lessons that we learned can potentially be put into different programs in the future. So we thought about continuing on this process by doing some sort of cafe where people could have access to the internet in the town. It's not just kids that need access to the internet. And there's not a lot of places in town that people can have fast internet. They can use their own devices. We've also talked about doing homework help after school and just giving kids a place to come as like an in-between school and home place where they can get help with their homework. And so we have now this really robust internet infrastructure that we can use to continue to serve the community in the future. So that's the long and short of the program. Very short. Brian shined brightly for a couple months and then was discontinued after the kids went back to school. But yeah, that's the Remote Learning Center in a nutshell.
Thanks so much, Zach. That's really awesome. And I think I just want to say that, on the one hand, maybe that particular program is short-lived, but I think many of us who are parents know how important it is to have those places after school. Kids if they don't have internet at home, they're maybe waiting in line in the library or waiting in line in the school library. And people have seen, I think, during the pandemic, but it's not just during the pandemic, when families would, be sitting in the McDonald's parking lot or going to McDonald's and doing their homework at McDonald's because they don't have access to internet in their home and they don't have anywhere to go. Sometimes in the lingo, we call it the anchor institutions, which a lot of times we think of as schools and libraries, but there's no reason that an anchor institution couldn't be a church or another community center where, caring people come together and realize the importance of the technology is part of that overall justice. That's what we always talk about at UCC's Media Justice Ministry, is that you need technology, you need media to create democracy, you need communications rights in order to fully participate in society, no matter what you're trying to do. And so we need to be sure that people are able to do that. And so now I bet you're wondering, wow, these are two unique examples, it seems. How could I, around the country, how could we connect with other people who might be doing the same thing? Or are these just unique ideas? But this is why we have Paolo here to talk with us from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which is a coalition of organizations around the country that work on digital inclusion. I think he mentioned a little bit about NDIA earlier, but I am now going to turn it over to Paolo.
Thanks. It's a big intro. Thanks for the intro. Zach and Kimberly's stories are amazing examples of, the power of organizing grassroots and, working with your neighbors effectively to address the needs of the community at large. As far as what NDIA does, we talk with folks who are on the ground doing this and sharing out what works and what doesn't work, right? We started officially in 2015, so we've grown to 530 affiliates, 530 plus affiliates in the past 6 years. We've seen a huge growth in the past 15 months as we're welcoming new different types of organizations who, in response to the pandemic, have realized like, oh, I need to integrate technology training and digital understanding to continue serving my community members. So we're welcoming in folks who work with refugee communities. We're welcoming folks who work with housing authorities, welcoming churches, right? Because in the past 15 months, I think everyone's realized like, okay, the internet is important, and frequently the people who need the internet the most are the ones who are left behind. So this is like the equity component to this sort of work that NDIA does. So in response to the pandemic, NDIA was talking with organizations on the ground who, suddenly had to switch everything from in-person learning to suddenly remote learning. So I was working at the New York Public Library at the time in their technology training program department, and we were doing this in real time. We were testing Zoom, we were testing Google Hangouts, and because we were a library, we had to think like, okay, who are our patrons? And if they're taking a computer basics class, Zoom might be a big ask for somebody, right? There's a lot of steps involved in logging onto a Zoom class. So locally at the library, we tested a few different programs and tested a few different teaching styles to figure out what's working and what's not working. Last July, which is when I joined NDIA, that's when I learned, oh, everyone else is doing this too. Public libraries, municipalities, housing authorities, et cetera, they were all doing what we were doing at the New York Public Library. So NDIA's role is there to gather all of these best practices, which is basically me talking with people all day and interviewing people and writing down, what are you doing? And if it hasn't worked, are you okay telling me why it hasn't worked? And if it does work, can you tell me why it does work? The result of those conversations is a program called Digital Navigators, which is now the main program that I run and support nationally with our network of affiliates. So on the next slide, you'll see Digital Navigators condenses the activities of digital inclusion. So in the NDIA world, I don't want to get too wonky, but we use this analogy of comparing our work to the three legs of the stool, right? A stool cannot stand unless all three components are there. So Digital Navigators is a program that combines all three of these levels here, that affordable broadband piece. So making sure that community members first are aware that they qualify for something like Internet Essentials if Comcast serves their area, and also walking folks through that process of filling out a form, which could be intimidating and inconvenient for a community member who is unfamiliar with the internet. That affordable devices piece, equally important, right? How are you going to use the internet if you're accessing a government form on your smartphone, which isn't necessarily built to display mobile fine. So Digital Navigators has components of working with computer refurbishers across the country, getting community members hooked up with Chromebooks, and always being there to help provide that technical support to make sure that community members know the availability of resources available online. The last piece is that digital literacy training piece. So, right, what I used to do at the library, teaching computer basics classes, teaching Excel classes. A digital navigator is that person who a community member, should call on if they need help doing anything on the internet. We're learning that a digital navigator, frequently their interactions with community members are taking 30 to 45 minutes, and that's over a Zoom call or a phone call. So that's a big win for us, because that's showing the need for that one-to-one interaction instead of just like a short, like 2-minute, like, hey, can you help me out with this? Like, people really want to be guided through this process. So I'll get into more of that in a bit, in a few slides from now. But just as far as like pinning down the equity piece around digital navigators, I just wanted to talk about some data from the American Community Survey, just thinking through, like, really pinning down that this is an equity issue more than anything. So, right, like, there are frequent discussions around like the urban and rural divide in various contexts, whether it's through broadband access or otherwise. Obviously for NDIA, we think about this in an internet service provider piece. So we're emphasizing broadband connectivity as an urban and rural issue, right? Like, let's not split the difference here. Like, the main thing that community members are experiencing in a lack of connection to the internet comes down to an affordability issue, right? So income in a rural area that doesn't allow you to get access to that to available broadband is going to be the same barrier as income in an urban area, right? Like, I live in New York City, where Comcast is a service provider. Across the street, my neighbors have another internet service, and my internet will go out, but their internet won't go out, right? Like, even in New York, that should not happen. Like, we're in 2021. The ISP issue, it's always this, just pinning down this issue of affordability. So as I was saying earlier, even with wires in the ground or even with cellular data coverage, the question is, who can't afford to be connected? Who's not paying for an internet subscription because they can't afford it? So I think this is an interesting stat, right? 36 million households in total in urban areas and 10 million households in rural areas don't have wireline. That refers to the wires in the ground. To put it another way, this figure is almost as many households in California and New York combined. On the next slide, you will just see a breakdown of internet adoption by income, just really to visualize the availability versus adoption issue through bar charts, right? So like lower income families, which I would categorize as households earning less than 50,000, take up a huge portion of who is not adopting. So digital navigators then is an equity issue. We want to make sure that we're serving community members who need it the most. So what is digital navigators, right? That's just a little bit of framing for what this work is and how it operates. Digital navigators, the biggest component of this program is trust, right? Like, digital navigators come from the communities that they are serving. So they work, or they're volunteers at community-based organizations. Cheryl mentioned anchor institutions like a school or a public library. We're also seeing digital navigators programs take off, like I mentioned earlier, in other social service programs like refugee resettlement. So in that case, like, language is a language and cultural competency are major pins for those particular digital navigators programs. They're digital equity resource guides, meaning that they are aware and they know of those available low-cost internet offers in a given area. NDIA helps them talk with device refurbishers to get devices for community members if they need them. But most of all, digital navigators are patient, right? Because working with a community member for upwards to 30 to 45 minutes, maybe over an hour, takes a lot of patience and a lot of empathy.
Speaking of technology, I'm not sure I can hear Paulo right now. I think his internet might have gotten a little bit glitchy. We'll see if he's gonna get back with us.
Is this better?
Yes, now I think I heard you.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Speaking of technology, right? Anyway, yeah, so yeah, so they are, they're local resource guides. NDIA provides some guidance to help them figure out where those resources are, but otherwise, I think of a typical branch librarian, mostly because that's my background, right? Like, who's that face that a community member can walk up to and say, like, I don't know how to ask this question, but I hope you can help me out. That's what a digital navigator is. I'll just run through the next few slides here very, very briefly. There are components of this program where we do try to measure the efficacy of digital navigators programs. So we have several what we call intake forms, where, like, through the help of talking with a bunch of different types of social service agencies last year who were doing this work, a lot of the language around digital navigators is informed by social service. So, like, an intake form is where the digital navigator records the technology issue of the person that they're working with. So, is it a device issue? Is it a connectivity issue? Is it a digital literacy issue? Is it all three? Just to prop up an example, one of the programs that we're supporting is with the Salt Lake City Public Library. They began direct service in December of last year with their grant running until September of this year. So there's a few tiny victories for that program. They set out to help 450 individuals throughout the course of that 10 months of direct service. As of March, we shot past that and have helped out 580, and that's as of March. So just showing that need for this type of service. And just as I'm a data geek, so just as a point of interest, like, I just think it's interesting that one of the major issues, or one of the common technology issues for that Salt Lake City Public Library program is device access. Like, I might have theorized that would happen, but just being able to collect and visualize data on communities and the effectiveness of a given program, I think is just super, super interesting. So I'll just wrap up there and put in a few links in the chat for how you can remain connected with us. I'll send it back to you, Cheryl.
Great, thank you so much. And it may have been my technology, not Paolo's, so I apologize if I stop things for my tech, but tech is tech, I guess. So thanks so much. This is really great information. And I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the Digital Inclusion Alliance has been, and we will definitely put all the links in the chat. If you're not with us here on Zoom today and you're watching this webinar later, there's a discussion chat board inside our classroom. And so we'll put all those links in that classroom so it's available for you later. And for people who are talking in the chat, we've had some nice conversation. We'll bring that up into our audio and visual conversation shortly. So we welcome your chat in the Zoom, but we will also have our conversation in the online classroom and that discussion board, because that's where everybody who accesses this information will be able to share it together. And I want to say that we had a great opportunity 2 years ago, in the last United Church of Christ General Synod. We actually partnered with a member of the Digital Inclusion Alliance that takes computers and refurbishes them to make them available to people who can't afford them. And so we had a bunch of volunteers in Milwaukee go and help refurbish computers and work with them. So the great thing about the Digital Inclusion Alliance is if you go to their website, which is at digitalinclusion.org, you can see other organizations around the country, and there may be somebody who's in a neighborhood near you who would welcome a volunteer or welcome a partnership in some way. Particularly right now, the pandemic, they've been completely overwhelmed and an unbelievable essential part of our community all around the country, gathering people up, getting them signed up for broadband where they can, helping them troubleshoot those issues. And I do want to flag how important, we all think, oh, who is a digital navigator? It's somebody else. But one of my favorite parts about Paolo's slide there is you, right? How many times have you either called a friend or a family member and been like, wait, I don't understand how I do this thing on my phone or my computer? And then how many times have you been able to help somebody else out, right? Like, that's how we actually learn. We all learn by talking to each other. It's not like you have to be some specialist. If you can open up a document program, whether it's a Google Doc or a Word program, you can then tell somebody else, look, this is how you type out a letter. This is how you create communication. This is how you make an email or sign up for Gmail. All of us have a certain amount of knowledge that we can share. And if we all just reach back and share the person who needs a little bit of help on one area, and maybe they can even help you on a different area. So it's a really important thing to remember that digital skills are not some special province of an elite group. They are part of, they're something that all of us can do. So now I want to talk about the UCC's Media Justice Ministry and what we have been working on. So we largely work with folks around the country. We work sometimes with churches and community. And one of the things we do a lot is we work here in Washington, D.C. I'm located right outside of Washington, D.C. And we advocate in front of the Federal Communications Commission, following in Everett Parker's footsteps. And we advocate in Congress to ask when we need things to be changed. And I have to say, one of the things that I'm very excited about now, I'm going to share, is this new program. We worked all last year. I have a colleague, I work very closely within the civil rights community. I have a colleague that I work closely with in the civil rights community. And at the earliest days of the pandemic, so early that I think we still didn't know how dangerous the virus was, but we got together at her kitchen table and we're like, we need a law, we need something to help people so that they can help afford access to broadband. And we wrote this law and we brought it to Congress, and it took 9 months and a lot of colleagues, and certainly none of this stuff happens alone. But last December, Congress adopted a provision that will give low-income families $50 a month off of broadband, and it's $75 a month off if you're in tribal areas. So this is a great opportunity. This means, I think, over the course of this conversation, we've been referencing that some cable companies, some ISPs, internet companies offer their own kind of philanthropic products. So Comcast offers Internet Essentials, Spectrum offers its own internet access program, Verizon. A lot of these companies offer something where they say, look, we as being part of a good citizen, we're going to offer a product that's cheaper if you are a low-income family, so you can have access to internet. But this program, the Emergency Broadband Program, is a government program and it pays for your internet. So even if you're on a product that is maybe cheaper because it comes from a company, this product could now be free. Any broadband product could be free. This program right now is a short-term program. It's just started. I was launched on May 12th. It will go until the money runs out. We got $3 billion to help pay for broadband. So we're expecting it'll go at least through the end of the year. And there are active efforts underway. If you watch television, you know that right now Congress is negotiating what sort of package might be passed this summer to help pay for infrastructure around the country. One of the things they're talking about is, will they add to this program? So this program may well go on more, but it will get people access to the internet at a lower price. So if there are people in your community who know who don't have broadband, and one of the reasons they don't have it is they can't afford it, this program will help. And so the big thing I want to tell you to do is go to this page, EBB Help, because it walks you through. It's one of our colleague organizations called Media Justice. They did a fantastic job kind of walking you through step by step. Are you eligible for the emergency broadband benefit? And then if you want resources about how to share this information out more broadly in your community, if you go to that link, which is also in the discussion board here in our webinar, there's a blog post, there's sample graphics like this one you see here. The United Church of Christ is a member of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which is a coalition of 200 civil and human rights organizations. And we all join together and work together, and this toolkit is from their work, so it's really rooted in the core of civil rights. So if you do one thing at the end of this webinar, I would ask that you see if you know anybody else and anybody in your community who could benefit from this program, and share the information. And if you know a little bit about how to buy broadband, help them out. Help them figure out what product would they buy, could they get online, what help would they need. Even if you help one person the same way you bought your neighbor's groceries during the pandemic, or just look out for the package on the front step, you can help folks do this too. So we're super proud at UCC Media Justice for the work that happened. It is not often that you go from idea to success policy in 9 months. It was too long. 9 months was too long in the pandemic, but it was shorter than some of the other things we were working on. And now I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about some other ways that you can help. So share EBB information with one family that could use it. Also, we've got a petition. We just love, we always want to make sure you're getting people on record to say that they support broadband access. And in particular, right now, like I said, Congress is both looking at this infrastructure package. There's all these things happening on Capitol Hill. It's a great maelstrom of one thing or the other, but we want to be sure that they know that they cannot finish their work after the COVID crisis without looking at broadband, that this connectivity, it is true that hopefully we'll be able to be back in person and are more back in person than we ever have been before. And at the same time, we all know that the world has changed. We all know that we're now attending worship online, and that probably we're going to want to continue to do some of that. We all know that there's going to be things that are going to continue to be online that maybe we never considered to be online before. There's going to be more virtual meetings. There's going to be more PTA where, hey, maybe I can't get down to the school, but I'm going to be able to patch in via Zoom. And how are those folks going to get to it if they don't have EBB? And so we want Congress to do that. We want to be sure that we're on record that they need to get that done. The second thing I'm going to tell you about that you can do is to keep your eyes open, because after July 12th, the United Church of Christ and the other many other partners are working with Consumer Reports to collect data about how much your broadband costs. So it's amazing. We have all this great data, and Paolo talked to you about some of it, but one of the things we really don't know is how much, as a nationwide matter, where exactly are people paying for their broadband? What are they getting? And so this is an effort to collect this data. So you'll be hearing information from us. Hopefully you'll share your information either in the chat, you'll sign up for this broadband petition, and then we'll capture your email and we'll send information about how you can completely secure for privacy reasons. It'll blot out your information, your name and address, but you can say, look, here's my broadband bill. This is how much I'm paying. And Consumer Reports, which is a pretty famous partner who does consumer advocacy, will look and determine, try to create data that figures out how much people are paying. And when we have that data, then it's much easier to advocate and get better prices for folks, more affordable prices once we know where we're starting with. And then the last thing here is, like I've said, we have a webinar, we have a discussion board, we have a chat room here as part of the UCC's General Synod webinar, and we definitely want to hear from you. Those of us who are here live together now can see there's a Zoom chat, but at the same time, if you're watching later, you're going to be able to get all this information through the discussion board. And if you're here and you want to say hi, we'd really love to hear from you. And in particular, I was really excited. Marvin is in the audience here today, and he shared at the beginning of our discussion, he shared that he is here because in part, he worked with Everett Parker a long time ago, back in the early days when the UCC's Media Justice Ministry was just getting started. So it's really great to have all those connections from the UCC from the beginning until now. And Everett lived an incredibly long and amazing life. And he only passed away a few years ago at the age of 102. So maybe a good shot to say how this work of justice can really keep you going and alive. He was energetic up until the last minute. He would still call us up and be like, "What are you doing? How are you helping?" So he was a great inspiration. And every year the UCC does a Parker lecture in his honor every fall. We've just actually announced we're going to have it October 19th this year online. And if you get on our mailing list through any of these ways, you'll hear a lot about the way that we honor new leaders and hear from new inspiring speakers every year in October in honor of Everett's legacy. So now we are on to the questions part of our event. So I am going to start